And why would you want to dismantle diet culture when it's been just so successful for so many people out there?
So many people. Yeah, I mean, of course, I always say if you can't do a diet for life, there's no point in starting it. There's no point because you'll always be disappointed in the end. You might get that little like jolt of dopamine, but that is just going to get squashed because very quickly and you're going right back to baseline. I always say like, you know, it's not worth the chase because it doesn't work.
Taylor came into the studio and he had this like drink and I'm like, what's that? A new protein shake? And he's like, no, it's I'm just drinking like copious amounts of semen every day because I've been told that this is the only way. Yeah, I know, right? So anyway, so he was drinking lots of cum for weeks on end. It was crazy.
No.
And I never even asked where you got it, but we'll leave that to another podcast, I guess. Anyway, what are some of the wildest dietary fads you've ever heard of? Well, I'm stoked to be having this conversation with our guest today, Abbey. Hello, Abbey.
Hi.
I'm stoked because I get to be a guest on Abbey's show very soon, but we have the pleasure of having Abbey on our show first. And for those of you who are not familiar with Abbey Sharp, kind of a fucking big deal. Abbey's Kitchen, YouTube content creator, quite a big following. You know, almost at 1 million followers. I mean, almost just shy by like 200,000 or so, but like that's a lot closer to 1 million than most.
Yeah. Do you get a big shiny plaque when that happens?
Apparently we do. Yes. Like I got a plaque at like 100,000 ages ago. And so, yes, you don't get anything else until you hit 1 million.
Right. They give you a plaque and they're like, yeah, 10X now.
Yeah. You get a plaque. I think you also get a key to your own city.
Yes.
Oh. Yeah. It's pretty cool.
That's fun.
And then, but also, Abbey, you've got a podcast.
I do.
Kind of a recent podcast, right? Bite Back.
Yeah, we just launched in the fall. So yeah, it's called Bite Back with Abbey Sharp, and really it's an extension of what I've become known to do online for, you know, the past 2 decades, and that is, you know, dismantle diet culture, call out the grifters and the charlatans who are constantly spinning pseudoscience, help people just make sense of what they read or see or hear about nutrition, because it's the Wild West, and it's, right, you know, it's unchecked, and unfortunately in an age of social media, most young people today are getting the vast majority of their health and wellness education, so to speak, from content creators who actually have no place talking about nutrition, who have, right, you know, no expertise, no training, no education. So, right, you know, I often feel like my job will never be done. I will never be able to retire because there will always be more, you know, just there's a constant stream of misinformation coming our way.
Now,
But
Abbey,
Abbey, who the fuck are you? Like, who are you to say? How do we know that you know what you're talking about?
And why would you want to dismantle diet culture when it's been just so successful for so many people out there?
So many people. Yeah, I mean, of course, because, you know, it's no coincidence that it's been alive and well for so long, because it doesn't work. It's a farce. And, you know, if we had a solution that worked, then we wouldn't still be having these conversations. And I mean, who am I? Well, you know, again, like I'm a dietitian. I came into this space because of my own experience with disordered eating, and diet culture led me down that path into what eventually became a very dangerous, destructive eating disorder called orthorexia. And that has really informed my why and what I do, because I see, especially with the advent of social media. I mean, I went through my eating disorder in my late teens. This was before social media. I can't even imagine how bad it would have been had I had access to the kind of quote unquote facts or information or misinformation, disinformation that young people have today.
What is orthorexia for those who've never heard that word before?
Sure. So Orthorexia is a eating disorder that is characterized by essentially an obsession with healthy eating. So where normally we think of something like anorexia, of a restrictive eating disorder, the obsession is around restricting food or the quantity of food you consume in a effort to lose weight, to shrink your body, etc. Orthorexia concerns itself with the quality of the food. So we often call it like clean eating taken to an extreme. And, you know, in an age of wellness culture and, you know, where diet culture has kind of been like repackaged into this, you know, it's just about health. We want to feel good. Like this, that's exactly the kind of thing that roped me into, you know, that ignited my eating disorder. And so because of that, because of the power of wellness culture and these messages around clean eating, detox, cleanses, cut this out for gut health, you know, all of these quote unquote diets out there that are positioned as being for health, they very much do breed obsession. And when that takes over your life, it can become just as dangerous, if not, you know, more dangerous than any other eating disorder that we had before. And it's worth pointing out that eating disorders are the leading psychiatric killer. You know, it's not like this is just like, oh, you look a little skinny, like it's not a big deal, like you'll get over it. No, this kills people. This kills a lot of people.
Can you? So okay, I understand orthorexia, but you know, when I hear you say it's an obsession with healthy eating, the dumb version of me is like, but that sounds like a great thing, you know, to be obsessed with eating healthy. How is that? How can that develop into something that is harmful? To be only focused on the things that we see and acknowledge to be the healthy choice.
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, essentially, and this is the dominant narrative, and this is kind of what breeds that that orthorexic mentality and keeps us stuck in that place, because we do as a society, we reward that kind of behavior. We see that as an act of willpower. You have got, you know, got so much willpower. You've got so much self-control. Like you're doing all these amazing things. Like good for you, pat on the back. When oftentimes, if you are actually struggling with orthorexia, or even if you are just kind of dabbling in this kind of quote unquote clean eating space and it's starting to take over your mind, it leaves very little mental energy and space for other things that bring you joy in life. And so when your whole life is consumed by these overwhelming feelings of guilt and shame because you ate something that quote unquote is bad or toxic or unhealthy, when those thought processes take over your life, even though they actually don't have an impact on your health, physical health, I should say, they absolutely do affect your mental health. And this is the mental, eating disorders are mental health disorders. So, we can't think about health in a vacuum of like, oh, what does my blood sugar say? What does my heart, my lipids say on my blood test? We have to think about health holistically. Am I able to fill my day with acts of joy? Am I able to go and have a meal with my family without being overwhelmingly consumed by these thoughts? Oh, that's bad. I shouldn't have done that. These spiraling thoughts. I think for a lot of people who have been trapped in diet culture for so long, they can almost not even imagine a world or a life where these thought processes are not like top of mind all the time. They're not always thinking like, oh, I shouldn't have eaten that. Oh, that's bad. And then they're feeling that guilt. Like their whole life is being consumed by that feeling of shame and guilt. And they're bad because they ate something bad and they internalize these things. This impacts every aspect of your life. It impacts your self-esteem, your self-worth, your confidence in yourself, your ability to have fun, your ability to go out and socialize with friends and family, with children, how you look at yourself in the mirror every single day, how you appreciate yourself. It's heavy.
I would also imagine that there's, especially like as you mentioned, in living, sometime in the last 10 years and dealing with something like orthorexia, where the information that you're getting about what is good and what is bad is oftentimes wrong. You know, like I'm an endurance athlete. I think carbs literally make me go forward. And, you know, when someone's like, you know, carbs are bad, and you're like, and so if that's a belief that somebody holds and they have something like orthorexia and you're thinking like, well, bread is bad. Like I can't eat bread because there's carbs. Like, so I shouldn't eat bread. Then, I mean, I
thought you couldn't eat bread because of gluten.
I think that's a whole, I think that's
God, shit, fuck.
Exactly.
I can't fucking keep it straight.
And so I would imagine it's probably quite easy, especially at this day and age, with so much access to bad information, that this healthy eating is oftentimes not just healthy eating taken to extreme, but it's just not. It just doesn't end up being healthy eating.
Correct. I mean, I think you made a really good point there, where, you know, it's like, well, you know, one day the gluten is bad, then the next day it's sugar that's bad, then the next day it's dairy that's bad, then now we're getting into like really specific things. Oh, you can't eat tomatoes because of like whatever reason. Now you can eat vegetables because of lectins. And so no matter what, you will find a piece of content or many pieces of content that are telling you that any food out there is bad. Like water is bad. Like vegetables are bad now because of the carnivore and animal-based diets. Like these are things that I thought as a nutrition professional that were like indisputable. Like vegetables are good. Eat vegetables. Like, you know, but here we are in an age where fringe diets are unfortunately the norm and people are taking everything to an extreme. And so we have these extreme diets coexisting as gospel at the same time. Where on the one hand, you've got the carnivore animal-based diets who are swearing you should be eating butter, like sticks of butter. And on the other hand, you've got like the raw frugivores who are telling you just to eat fruit, eat a whole watermelon for lunch kind of thing. And
both of those things sound awesome, by the way.
Right.
Fucking love the both.
But
of
you
those
can't
ideas.
do both, Jer.
Right.
You can't do both.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, gotta choose one.
Extreme.
Copy.
Because if you just did both of those things, then you wouldn't be like in the throes of this kind of extreme diet culture. And so it is so hard for the lay person to be hearing all this conflicting information and they'll try one thing, it doesn't work, they try the next thing, it doesn't work, whatever work means, because we as a society love black and white, we love quick fixes, we think if it sounds like, if it's boring, it's not going to work, when in the reality is like balance works. Sleep, eat a balanced meal, move your body, manage stress. Like these are basic tenets of health, but they're not sexy. They're not sensationalized enough to get people's attention. We want we are convinced that, it's got to be like more, like there's got to be like a secret that the government and all these like registered dietitians are hiding, because it can't just be, I need to sleep and eat protein and carbs and fat. Like what?
Yeah.
As somebody who has like spent a lot of time talking about diet culture, I have this memory that stands out in my head, which is kind of like, I guess like a conglomeration of memories of like my mom always having these books around when I was a kid that was like the South Beach diet or the, what's it called? The Akana diet or Atkins, the Atkins diet.
I think the Akana diet is what Donut was on.
Yeah, that's a dog food.
I think that's my dog food.
Raw food.
Yeah. My dog's food.
I mean, I think she tried that one too, but, and I always kind of looked at it as like the way that sort of, like fitness trends sort of came in and out of vogue, and that like, I guess I'm just kind of like fascinated with the culture of like, of trying to adhere to a diet. And I assume that a lot of people are in this where they don't have a disorder or anything. They're just kind of always in search of like something that's going to make a change. And maybe is it like the change, not necessarily like even what the change will be, but that there will be a change, and like the change will be what they're going after, that like switching from like eating this way, for 6 months to eating this way for 6 months, and never really kind of like locking into any type of, long-term goal-oriented system that they feel works for them and makes them feel good, obviously, is the main outcome. I'm just fascinated by the whole mentality and and the way that, like a book like the South Beach Diet can make its way into like millions of homes and kind of just be bullshit. Like that's fascinating.
Oh, it's totally fascinating. And, so much of diet culture is marketing. It's good marketing. Because we are all driven by this promise that this one's going to be different. Like, yeah, you tried this. Yeah, you tried that. Obviously it didn't work because it's not this one. And then obviously, we go through the motions of doing this new diet and maybe we get a little bit of quote unquote success at first, but we either, feel so deprived and get into that scarcity mentality and then binge and then like, oh, fuck, my diet starts again tomorrow kind of thing. And then we realize, okay, that one didn't work. We got to switch to the next one. And I think that's a pattern that like a lot of people kind of cycle through. Or we just kind of get bored with the chase is over, the novelty's over. And then it's kind of just like we slip back into our like baseline. And then we're just like, I need that next, like that excitement. Because there's a real like excitement in starting a new diet. Because
you're telling people about it. You're like, hey, I'm doing this thing. I just went out. I changed my grocery order up. Like I just bought all this stuff. I'm making my meals all for the next 3 days. Like people get really excited about that
you're
stuff.
on like a little bit of like a high because like you're high on hope. Right? Like you're high on like, this is going to be the one, this is going to be the one to change my life. And like, again, like I always say, if you can't do a diet for life, there's no point in starting it. There's no point because you'll always be disappointed in the end. You might get that little like jolt of dopamine as you like feel like you're like doing something new, doing something, this is going to work. But that is just going to get squashed because very quickly and you're going right back to baseline. And it kind of puts you into this cycle of like a high and a real low when you realize like it failed or like, you've gained the weight back because all those things are like generally inevitable with most of, if not all these fad diets. So I always say like, it's not worth the chase because it doesn't work.
I'm curious, like as a registered dietitian who struggled with orthorexia, how much so was it hard for you to acknowledge or see that you had orthorexia? Someone who's come from like this educational background where you have so much knowledge around what healthy eating looks like, what foods are good, what foods are, quote unquote bad, how foods affect people that live with certain chronic illnesses. At what point did it dawn on you that like, oh shit, I'm suffering from an illness that is surrounding this thing that I've spent so much of my time investing my education behind, and like were you surprised when you found out, oh, I have orthorexia, or what did that look like?
So this I came into, I can kind of tell you the bit of the backstory. I was I had just graduated high school. And very innocently, no different than the stories I hear from so many other young people online, I was feeling like, you know what, like my digestion's a little bit off. Like I'm going to go see this like homeopathic naturopath person that somebody recommended. This was, I was young. I had just graduated high school. I was in school for theater actually. So I also was a theater junkie. And so that was what I thought I was doing. And through this process, this homeopathic naturopath was like, oh yeah, like you need to cut out this, you need to cut out this. And so it started again with this like quest for health. And that's how orthorexia starts. I want to feel better. I want to, I just want to do this for my health. It wasn't about losing weight. I didn't need to lose weight. I just wanted to like improve my digestion. And that very quickly snowballed into like, I'm scared of sugar. I'm scared of fat. I'm scared of this. And it was like this overwhelming fear that if I ate any of these things, something bad was going to happen. Like I was going to get sick. I was going to, bloat. I was going to have IBS symptoms, all that stuff. And that's what spiraled into the orthorexia. And actually it was while I was kind of struggling because again, I was in ED mentality, obsessed with all things nutrition. that is what inspired me to go into nutrition, because I was so obsessed. Like, this was like, I thought, I didn't know I had an eating disorder. I thought I was just interested in nutrition. I was just a healthy eater. That was like, again, that's like the story we tell each other. I'm just interested in health. And so that was what drove me to get into the nutrition program. And interestingly enough, if you look at the data, you can see that there are extremely high rates of eating disorders in nutrition students. For this reason, probably because a lot of us go into it already obsessed, thinking that this is just like, oh, this is my passion, this is my interest, but we are like actually hurting. And it wasn't until I kind of went through the program, obviously did therapy and things like that, which came after my weight had gotten so low that, I was like 85 pounds and 5'7". And so, I very much was sick. I was sick and I needed to get help. I needed to get, physically recover, but also work through the mental recovery. And I worked with a dietitian who kind of like inspired me into this path. And I guess the rest is kind of history. But I think that it's very common for a lot of, people who are just seemingly interested in nutrition, and therefore whether they're studying it professionally or they're studying it just, because they think that it's interesting and they're kind of doing their own quote unquote research. It can very quickly go too far and kind of end up in dangerous territory.
We spoke the other day as like a little sort of pre-chat before I come on your show, and one of the things I was talking to you about was living with cystic fibrosis, and I mean, I don't know, maybe it's not unique, but I feel like it's kind of a unique situation when it pertains to diet. The sort of like the messaging I always got from registered dietitians, which I've always had a registered dietitian as a part of the CF clinic, because weight management, weight loss, weight gain is like a huge part. I mean, malnutrition is a big part of cystic fibrosis. And so I spent the majority of my life being basically told like, hey, you need high fat, high calorie. You need to eat the way that,
and sodium, lots of salt.
Yeah,
you need lots of
you
salt.
need to eat all the ways that like everybody else around you is probably thinking that's not the way to eat. And to the degree where, I remember multiple times being told or hearing my parents be told when I was young, it doesn't matter where it's coming from as long as it has the fat and the calories. So like, if he wants to slam back Big Macs every day, let him.
That was the exact same message I got when I was bulking up as a teenage hockey player.
Right. Okay. So right. So there we go. There's like a semi-similar mentality when it comes to like
eat
sports.
Everything and go to the gym. It will turn into muscle. It will you just need calories.
Yeah. And to, I will say that there were a number of times throughout my life, especially going into my young adult life, where, after doing like a yoga teacher training and starting to like view certain elements of my diet in a maybe a different light, whether it's like my meat consumption or, like looking at dairy and thinking about dairy from these different perspectives of like good or bad, always attributing good and or bad to the things, really started to like kind of fuck with my head. So I'm knowing that was my experience. But then when we hear from people that live with something like, say, diabetes, again, an illness that is so heavily revolved around diet. What are your thoughts? What is your take on diet culture or the notion of diet when it pertains to chronic illness, and especially a chronic illness that is so heavily focused on what we put into our body in order to stave off or maintain an optimal level of health with living with a chronic illness. Whether it's patients you've had in the past or people you've spoken to through your career as a content creator, like what are some of your observations from that standpoint?
Yeah, so it is so interesting because I even remember, you bring up your experience is obviously so unique when we compare it to like the average person trying to, maintain, not gain more weight or lose weight and things like that. So, and I remember when I was doing my internship, I was working with chronic kidney disease patients. And kidney disease is very interesting because it's typically comorbid with diabetes. And unfortunately, the nutritional recommendations for diabetes and kidney disease are literally opposite. It's like with diabetes, you want more fiber, you want whole grains. With chronic kidney disease, you want to give them like cornflakes. You want to give like low fiber, like refined grains. And so trying to balance that for people is very stressful. But I think just generally speaking, when it comes to, chronic disease and these messages, unfortunately, especially things like diabetes or, PCOS and, all sorts of things that we see online, there are so many extreme messages, whether that's, you've got to go keto, for example, if you have diabetes, or you have to go carnivore, for example. And what we often see, again, it comes down to like sustainability. And when we are kind of taking in all of these like very extreme suggestions on like, okay, this is what you need to do to manage your chronic disease. This is what you need to eat. You have to cut out all these foods. The stress alone is not good for the chronic disease. Mm-hmm. So, as a dietitian, and I can speak for a lot of my, if not all of my colleagues who work with one-on-one in specific chronic disease areas of practice, it's so important to meet people where they are. It's so important to say, okay, this is your starting point. We're not going from here to here overnight. We might not ever get here, and that's okay. It's about looking at the holistic picture. What can you do without you getting into that scarcity mentality, which we know always results in a rebound. So when it comes to like diabetes, for example, yes, the idea is to balance your blood sugars. I would personally and professionally never say to someone, okay, well, you want to keep your blood sugars low? Don't eat any sugar ever again. Don't eat any carbohydrates ever again. Because we know that like the birthday party is going to come up, the holiday is going to come up, whatever it is, people can't sustain that typically for very long. And that's why we look at data on like the keto diet and we see that the retention rate is dismal. It's so bad. Mm-hmm. And so even if you're highly motivated because you have a chronic disease or you want to reduce the risk of like, pre-diabetes becoming diabetes or, diabetes becoming out of control, you want to reduce your medication, whatever your goal is, we still have to make it realistic. So that's where working with a dietitian is really important because we can help kind of tweak where you are right now by adding something rather than taking things away. And that's really my professional approach to nutrition is rather than thinking about restricting things, taking them away, you can't eat that. It's all about what can I actually add to that meal or snack to make it more balanced, more satiating, to get the more nutrition in. And typically that ends up kind of edging out some of the like less nutritious components of those meals or snacks.
And I would imagine like that there's, you probably run a risk with a lot of people and like using you as an example, Jer, when, if you're working with somebody and, instead of looking at that person and having a conversation about like where they are, like what are the things that like like, I don't know, have you been like a practicing vegetarian for however long, whatever, like, do you eat dairy or are you allergic to something that is like commonly found in diets? And then working from that place,
yes,
instead of like opening up a textbook and being like, okay, yep, like you have CF. So like, this is what you do if you have CF. It says it right here. I'm taking a total assumption, but Jer and I have eaten 1,000 meals together. Jer always leaves scraps of food on his plate, which is fantastic for me because I'm always looking for more food. I mean, I wouldn't be blown away if one of the reasons why you leave scraps of food on your plate is because people have been telling you to jam food in your face since you were 2 years old.
And I'm going, oh yeah? Well, how about this? No.
Yeah. And like, so like, that might be some like psychological pocket buried down deep somewhere where you're just like, fuck this. I'm not finishing this meal because I don't want to stuff my face with food because I'm not doing it.
I don't care how many starving children there are. Yeah.
And so like, like the psychological sort of like repercussions of trying to just like adhere to a textbook recommendation based on a disease or whatever it may be, you know, that can really impact the way that the relationship that people end up having with food, which obviously you want to be positive because it's probably the most important thing in your life.
Of course. I like you just said, like, you know, I always think of us as like angsty little like teenagers. Like if you tell a teenage girl, like, you can't wear that to school, like you bet she's going to put a sweater over top and then take it off when she gets to school. Like that, you know, so like we always do things that we tell ourselves we shouldn't do, or someone else has told us we shouldn't do. So we by nature are going to want to rebel against whatever rules we've kind of set up, you know, for what we can and cannot eat. And it's not just like, of course, there's a psychological deprivation piece, which typically what we see is this kind of restrict binge cycle. So like, you know, you restrict, so you tell yourself you can't eat this, or you have to eat less, which is either psychologically, you know, feel deprivation psychologically because you love that food, or you are physically starved, like you are hungry. And so then what happens is that like your willpower eventually wanes as you kind of like maybe get a little taste, and then the floodgates open, and then it's a full-on binge, and then you're like, oh, fuck it. You feel so guilty. The next day you restrict even harder. You restrict harder. And then of course that can only last so long, that willpower, and then bam, back into the binge restrict cycle. And this repeats and repeats and repeats. And it's very hard for people to get out of that cycle. Some people live their lives in that cycle, and it really does start. We have to nip it in the bud, and to do that, we actually have to allow ourselves unconditional permission to enjoy, to choose foods that we actually enjoy. Because if you're just going to drag yourself through a bowl of kale every single day in the name of quote unquote health, it will result in a binge. And we know that binge restrict cycle is far more dangerous than just kind of a moderate, you know, a more moderate approach to nutrition.
I mean, I've always felt the exact same way about exercise. You know, it's like if you want to be healthy from an exercise standpoint, will probably be a headache to find the thing that you do actually love to do. But like if you're doing something just for the sake of it being like a healthy exercise for you to do, odds of you sticking with that long term, pretty low. You know, like better to just go through the shitty, painstaking process of like trying new shit for a long time until you find the thing that you're like, I actually like doing this, and it actually isn't about the health aspect of it. It's just because I like doing it.
Yes.
And then do that thing. And I feel like it's the same, you know, with food. When if you don't like it, you're not gonna do it.
I mean, to that point, like, so I remember having a conversation with a dietitian once, and the notion of intuitive eating came up, and I remember when I heard that term and when I had it explained to me, it made a lot of sense. But I also had this part of me that I don't know, thought about intuitive eating from the standpoint of like, okay, but also does that open someone up to potential harms in the sense that like perhaps your intuition of what you want to eat isn't necessarily the greatest choice to begin with, you know? And I feel like what I'm saying is like maybe potentially a little bit like triggering for some people listening to this, maybe a little bit doesn't like feel good to hear, but I'm, you know, maybe I'm wrong. I'm curious what your thoughts are on intuitive eating, and you know, for folks that don't know what intuitive eating is, please give us your sort of definition.
Yeah, so intuitive eating is first of all, I want to kind of clarify how you kind of described intuitive eating, which is ultimately how most people describe intuitive eating, which is kind of like the eat whatever the fuck you want diet, or it's the, you know, eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full. And when you think about intuitive eating in just those specific ways, yes, it can be dangerous. It can be bad because like you said, like, well, you know, at least the criticism I hear from a lot of people is like, well, if I just ate intuitively, I would just eat cake all day, or I would Or for folks, for example, who are on medications that suppress their appetite, somebody might say, well, if I just ate intuitively, I'd eat 500 calories in the day and I would starve. Or, so I think, and like, likewise, this kind of, it's just the eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full thing. When we've been raised in diet culture, from a very young age, we have learned to override those innate hunger and fullness cues. A lot of people don't actually know how to listen to their body and how to fuel their body. They just know, oh, I need, 2,000 calories. I'm just going to follow my MyFitnessPal, track it all, bang, bang, bang. I know what if I eat this and it gives me this many grams of protein. We've lost touch with our body in a lot of different ways. And so the idea of just, throwing caution to the wind and eating what your body says is really scary for people. But I think what people actually need to understand is that intuitive eating is that idea of intuitive eating really misses a lot of the nuance and the context of what the framework truly is. It's really a mind-body framework that's grounded in self-care. And there's 10 tenets, there's 10 principles of intuitive eating that kind of build on one another. And so, the first tenet is to reject the diet mentality. And it's so important that we reject the diet mentality. And what I mean by that is to get out of this idea that foods are good and bad, they're clean, they're junk, they're this dichotomous thinking about food, and the idea that if I eat this food, then I am bad. Or if I eat this food, then I am good. The morality that we place around food, we have to get rid of that. And the reason for that is if we are trying to listen to our body, let's say, and eat intuitively, but we're still stuck in that diet mentality where in the back of our head, we're constantly thinking, well, this is pretty high in calories, or, oh, this is like not very high in protein. Like, I really shouldn't be eating this. I definitely need to add this. I definitely need to remove this. I shouldn't be eating this. If that chatter is still going on in our brain, it is impossible to learn our body's true hunger, fullness, satiety, satisfaction cues, because we're just constantly kind of like distracted by this noise. So that's why we have to do that first, and then we build on that with things like rejecting the food police and coping with our emotions with kindness. Then we can get into honoring our hunger and our fullness cues, and finally, when we get to like the very end, number 10, principle 10, that is gentle nutrition. And so I think, again, people think intuitive eating is just, well, I can eat cake all day. No, gentle nutrition is built into the framework because it gives us a structure. Once we rejected the diet mentality and we're really truly in tune with what feels good to our body, we are simply collecting data on objective data without judgment on how different foods are making us feel. So for example, when you've put the diet mentality on the back burner and you have a meal, let's say you have Lucky Charms for breakfast. And Lucky Charms now in your mind is not, oh, this is super unhealthy, I'm bad, I'm a bad person, like, oh, I should feel guilty. It's just Lucky Charms. But you realize, hey, like I was like hungry like an hour after I ate those Lucky Charms. Data, I'm putting that in my back pocket for the next time. So then maybe the next morning you're like, okay, I still feel like Lucky Charms because Lucky Charms aren't bad. They're not good. They're just Lucky Charms. But I'm going to put that on top of some Greek yogurt, see how that feels. And now you've collected some data. I can have Lucky Charms, but I've got protein here, which is keeping me fuller longer, and I'm not getting that blood sugar crash. So it's all about kind of combining that body, that interoceptive body data with also some brain data as well, especially for folks who do have chronic disease, who are on medications that may be impacting their hunger fullness cues. That often means that we might have to be more mindful that, okay, I might not be hungry in this moment, but I know that if I don't eat something with, some protein, that I'm going to be so ravenous by lunch that I'm probably going to faceplant into the donuts in the staff room. So again, it's about like collecting data for future meals, for future, eating episodes, as I call them, without judgment. There has to be no judgment, because once the judgment and the shame comes in, we're going straight back into that binge, restrict, repeat cycle.
I just had a thought about the term intuitive eating, and but I mean, just like getting down to semantics here, but like and maybe this already is a term, but like I feel like a term that fits more with me, aligns with like the way that I would kind of view it, is somatic eating. Like when I think about somatic, I think of like the way that you connect your body
Yes.
and your thoughts, and it's like and it has to do with the way that you feel, somatically feeling
Yep.
this this thing that you're going
Yeah.
through. Somatic eating. I'm sure if you Google somatic eating, somebody out there is already
Oh, for
coined
sure.
that.
It's similar to mindful eating, and all of those pieces, somatic eating, mindful eating, they're part of intuitive eating. But intuitive eating at its core, the whole purpose of it is to help you improve your relationship with food, reject diet mentality, achieve food freedom, where you are fueling your body with what actually your unique body needs, rather than relying on external indicators for what you quote unquote should eat.
Which is also a moving target. I mean, you
Yeah,
know, you don't always need the same
No,
shit.
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
you need different things at different times. Like when I'm in race season, like I probably eat twice as much food.
Mhm.
And it's like, and I lose weight because I'm just like, I'm racing all the time. I'm on my bike several hours, countless hours a week. And like, and then when that stops, it's like, I don't even think about it. I just like maybe 2 weeks later, I'll go, wow, crazy. Like I'm not eating, I'm eating half of what I was, a month ago. And like, if you're pregnant, if you've got a disease, like if you've whatever, like what you need is always in flux.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think one of the things that like floats to the surface for me having this conversation, Abbey, and just thinking about your profession and what you do, and like one thing that's so challenging about it is that like on the surface level, it's like, it seems, like fairly black and white. Like even if you're talking to somebody who has, like really individualistic needs, that it's like, okay, cool, we can get those needs, and then we can like kind of prescribe something to you or help you create a prescription for eating that works for you. But then having to deal with so much of the mental roadblocks that are associated with food, which like, I mean, a gigantic portion of the population has, and how that has to be integrated into like how you approach those conversations with people. And kind of, I guess, a lot of times based on them maybe being like forthcoming with what their relationship with food is, and how they think about food when you're trying to, when you're trying to work with somebody to find out how best to serve them. Like just how challenging that is, that there can be so much packed into the way that we packed into our relationships with food. It's not just like, here's a food and here are all the components of that food, like the macro and micro components of that. And like, here you go, just do that.
Yeah. It's so loaded. I always say like, when I, as a dietitian, it's never just about the food, right? Like it's never just about the macros or the calories. Like we have these very intricate associations and relationships with certain foods, or our body, and how we interpret like who we are in the world as it relates to the foods that we eat. And unfortunately, like, just wellness culture and diet culture has really reinforced this idea that, quote unquote, you are what you eat, which can be very triggering for a lot of people, because there is this heavy moralization around food choices. And I always tell people, like, it's really important, like, to remind yourself that foods may not be nutritionally equal. Like an apple's not going to be nutritionally equal to a pack of Skittles, but we can make them morally equal by putting them on the same kind of moral playing field, and just removing that judgment piece. And that alone can make such a difference in the food choices you make. Because like I said earlier, like we as a species don't like to be told we can't do something or have something. So when we stop putting foods, these quote unquote bad foods, on a pedestal, it kind of removes the novelty factor. It's not like, it loses its allure, and you're way better able to actually evaluate, like, do I even really like that much? Like I hear from people all the time that once they learn to kind of reject diet mentality, stop thinking about foods as good and bad, stop restricting foods, they realize that the foods that they were binging on previously because they couldn't have them or shouldn't have them, they don't even like them that much. Like that's what I learned from myself. Like I was like obsessed with candy. I don't like candy. Now that it's not off limits, I don't actually want it. It sits in the pantry untouched because I don't think about it when it's not something that I can't have. It's not something that I'm thinking about.
I'll come over and clear out your pantry.
Jared
no
loves
problem.
candy.
Yeah.
I have a 2.5-year-old and this was the first Halloween that she was like, this is Halloween. Like we're dressing up, we're going out, everybody's, people are giving out candy. And as a new parent, especially in the age of social media, I mean, there's just way too many things about how you should raise your kid and what you should do with them and how you should treat them and all these things. And I think one of the most frustrating parts of it is how much it seems to be like, this is data backed in terms of like, hey, here's like two completely opposite things that are both data backed. And so my partner was like, Taylor, have you heard about this thing called the Switch Witch? And I was like, no. She's like, the Switch Witch comes like the day after Halloween and switches all your kids' candy out with, I can't even remember, like an apple or whatever.
Oh my God, dude, the Switch Witch sounds like a bitch to me.
Yeah, the Switch Witch is a bitch. Yeah, the Switch Bitch.
Fuck, get away from my candy.
and I was like, oh man, like that seems like a big bummer. And the reality was, like, okay, cool, it's Halloween, come home, eat all the candy you want, and like you're gonna feel shitty, like because you're gonna eat too much candy and you're gonna feel like shit, and like all you are is intuition as a child, and then you'll just make that connection, and then like we'll put the candy in a drawer, and you can have a little bit of it every now and again until it's gone.
You got it.
And like it's like if you treat it like you're gonna be obsessed with it, like you said, take it away. Make it off limits and you're gonna want it.
Yeah.
And it was it was a fascinating little like hearing this thing that goes out in the world and that people are doing and going like, oh, okay, well, I've got my own little experiment right here. Like, let's see how it goes. And complete opposite, like just give the freedom. Yeah. And there's so much more to it.
Switch. So first time I ever heard Switch Witch, gonna add that one to the old noggin there. Speaking of these, hilarious, sometimes batshit crazy, just bananas, like dietary fads or like wellness eating fads. I mean, Abbey, you're in the world of content creation when it comes to food and diet. I'm sure you see this stuff all the time. Through, I mean, I don't have TikTok, but I imagine like opening up TikTok, it doesn't take you long to like see the latest, like whatever it is. I think my most recent favorite one was actually Taylor when Taylor and his partner were going through some like IVF. They had fertility issues, and Taylor came into the studio and he had this like drink, and I'm like, "What's that? A new protein shake?" And he's like, "No, it's I'm just drinking like copious amounts of semen every day because I've been told that this is the only way." Yeah, I know, right? So anyway, he was drinking lots of cum. For weeks on end. It was crazy. No. And I never even asked where you got it, but we'll leave that to another podcast, I guess. Anyway, what are some of the wildest dietary fads you've ever heard of?
Chair, you're not supposed to say it, dude.
Other than Taylor drinking so much cum, are there any other kind of weird fads that you've heard of over the, maybe over the last like year, because we're
other than that,
we're recording right now in December. It's the end of 2024. What are some of the 2024 fads that you've been looked at and gone, Jesus, wow, where did this come from?
Well, I just have to say I'm an IVF mom myself, and I guess
Did you guys do the cum guzzling?
We did not do the cum guzzling.
I mean, you didn't?
No.
Yeah.
Oh,
interesting.
Man.
I mean, they had a baby, and then they went to do IVF again, and they accidentally had a baby without IVF. So it probably works if you're listening to this right now.
Yeah, data back.
Just drink cum. That's it.
God. Yeah. Oh Lord. Okay. Don't let my husband hear that.
Let's clip this and put it on TikTok. It's gonna blow up.
It will. Dietitian says drink cum. No. Oh Lordy. Okay, so no, didn't hear about the cum. But I would say like, I think, we are living in the age of Ozempic, of course.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
and
yeah.
now as that world evolves, everyone and their grandma is trying to come up with these like Ozempic, faux Zempic, like, or Ozempic
Right.
dupes. And
Right.
so, it irks me. And one thing that, there was like this going around like oat Zempic or rice Zempic, where people were making these drinks, which was just water, pureed oats in like a big blender of water, some oats.
Fucking oat milk.
I know,
Yeah.
oats, water, and lime juice. And they're like, yeah, it's just as effective as Ozempic. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, first of all, nothing that we
I think
have-
GlaxoSmithKline might have saved a little bit of money if they had just done that.
Right. But nothing is going to be ever as powerful. I mean, I shouldn't say never, but like at this time, nothing, no food, no supplement, no like dupe is going to be able to do what Ozempic does, period. But it just makes no scientific sense. Like, of all things, like, why would we want to be drinking like carb water that doesn't, like, it's not even very high in fiber, there's no protein? Like, have a protein shake. That's going to do a much better job at like stimulating the like GLP-1 hormones than like water with some lime juice and rice in it. Like, it's just so asinine that things that people come up with. It's almost like sometimes I feel like everyone's just trolling. Like, everyone's just like, like coming up with the most outrageous things, and then it goes viral, and then because people like have lost critical thinking skills, everyone's just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do that without actually like looking into what the hell they're doing.
Totally. I mean, that's how I got that's how I got into the cum thing.
Yeah.
No.
Watched a couple of videos on the wrong website. Yeah.
And then I was locked in.
Locked in. Yeah. That's all you got served on your social media.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. I did it once, and then it was every video for 12 months.
Yeah. He didn't actually. I'm going to say it just in case anybody has lost their critical thinking skills. Taylor did not drink bucket loads of jizz to have a baby. So there we go. I said it.
I tried to, and then Jer talked me out of it. Actually, is how it went down. Speaking of Ozempic or Wegovy or whatever, I know that there's several of those diabetes medications, turned weight loss pills, and now there's like weight loss specific pills. We talked to Johan Hari not long ago about his new book, which kind of covers his like look into the world of Ozempic and weight loss pills, and I've been kind of fascinated with the idea of like, you've got this thing in this global health crisis with obesity and all the downstream health effects that come from that, and how changing like a global culture in terms of how we take care of ourselves from a physical and mental standpoint, and how long something like that takes, and how long of a social campaign backed with programs and billions or trillions of dollars to get this outcome that will likely happen if ever generations. It will take generations for it to happen. And then you get something like this, which is like, you take this pill and this has, this can start to like immediately impact, a huge number of people, and at least how it looks like in some of the stuff that's been coming out is that this does have a beneficial health impact in terms of like heart disease and things like that, and diabetes. But then at the same time, it's like at odds with the idea of, I don't want to call it self-responsibility, because I don't think that's the right word, but like the idea that you should be mindful of like how you treat yourself with the exercise that you do, with the food that you put in your body. Like that, I don't know. These two things, like they seem like they're on the same team in some ways, and then they're at odds with each other in others. Like from a dietitian standpoint,
as though it could cause like bad habits.
Yeah, or like apathy in some of the most important parts of our lives because the pill did it. And how does that affect the way that we, I don't know, see ourselves in the way that we need to take care of ourselves. Like, I don't know. It's not even like a fully formed thought. It's just like, it's like a fascination with like something that's not even done yet. It's, it's still going on, and we're still learning and stuff. How do you think about that from your perspective?
I mean, as someone with thin privilege, who I've never lived in a larger body, so I don't have the lived experience of all the challenges that come along with obesity, whether those are physical challenges and also social challenges, emotional challenges, discrimination, fat phobia, all those kinds of things. And that is so well documented. I could go on for hours. But I will say that I think this narrative, and Ozempic in general, the whole conversation around Ozempic just goes to show that fat people will always be hated, and they will always be, they can't win because they're lazy and unmotivated. And like, this is not my opinion. I'm just saying this is the way society paints fat folks, is they are lazy. They are, they have no willpower. They're useless, worthless, whatever, because they can't lose weight. And then when they have an option to lose weight, now they're taking the easy way out, and they're lazy and they're not trying enough, and they're just, whatever. And so in the end, it just further reinforces fat phobia in a lot of ways. And I always kind of think about my own experience. I don't have a physical chronic disease, so to speak, but I have suffered from various mental health disorders, anxiety, insomnia, eating disorder. I have ADHD, and so over the years, like, I have relied on medication to help me live my best life. And I don't want to say, there's a lot of pill shaming across the board for all things. This is part of wellness culture, and it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. But I feel very confident saying that there are a lot of roadblocks in the way for a number of people to lose weight and keep it off long term. And so I have a lot of empathy for people. I mean, the whole Ozempic conversation is so nuanced because there are absolutely side effects. There are absolutely dangers. There's absolutely dangers to public health, especially because a lot of folks are abusing this. I hear from people who live in LA that like everybody's on Ozempic, even though they like obviously do not need to be on Ozempic for any kind of health related reason. And it's very easily abused, especially because it's so easy to access these days. But I think that it's just, we are at a place where for folks feel like it's fat folks, people in larger bodies feel like it's such a hostile environment, no matter which direction that they go. And if we wouldn't necessarily shame somebody who has diabetes for taking metformin, if it was going to improve their health, it was going to improve longevity, etc. We wouldn't see that as taking the quote unquote easy way out. I mean, that's not true, actually. A lot of people do see medication, but less so. And so I just think it disadvantages everyone to perpetuate this narrative that, by taking a shot or a pill that like you are just too lazy to actually try the hard way. Chances are, these people who, and I don't want to say all people because, again, people are abusing these medications who don't need them. But a lot of people who are resorting to GLP-1 agonists, they have tried a lot of things. Like they have done all the diets. They have yo-yoed their whole life. They have lost weight, gained weight. They might have had weight loss surgery. They might have been on other weight loss drugs, And so it's hard for me to make a sweeping statement if this is good or bad because it depends on the individual. But I will say that for a lot of people who have been dealing with persistent, what I'll call like food noise, what typically we see that in the literature called food noise, which is this persistent, nonstop chatter in the head around food. This may help silence that for them. And if that can improve their whole life, imagine again, you turned off a switch and suddenly you had space in your day, in your life to think about something other than food. Imagine how freeing that would be. Imagine how much that, like, what world that would open up for you to actually engage in other acts of self-care and, enjoy your family, enjoy your life, enjoy your work more, things like that. So, I can't make a sweeping statement that this is either good or bad because it depends on the individual. But I do think that the narrative of just seeing this as the quote unquote easy way out, it harms everyone. And that's true for all medications. Mental health medications too. I've been pill shamed many times for, being on a antidepressant, for example, taking the easy way out. I should just heal myself through food or, nutrition or whatever. But it's like my brain needs to be rewired, and this is what's helping me. And I'm so grateful that I have these opportunities and options, and it goes for all these medications.
Yeah. I think like when I zoom out and I think about it from a global, because when I think about it from a global perspective, like a population level, you're just like, I just think like, man, obesity has just caused so many people so many problems. And like, if there is like, to think that we've like developed a way to combat it quickly, and that there's any reason why we shouldn't do that, barring that being, ultimately being bad for us, which is, doesn't seem to be the case. Why would we shame that? Like, when this thing that has killed so many people and will kill so many people, directly or indirectly, like, why would we not want to intervene in that?
Yeah. Abbey, I mean, I love chatting with you. This has been such a fun conversation. Obviously you are, making waves. People love to hear your thoughts and follow your content. For our listeners that are just, being tuned into you for the first time, how can they find you? How can they stay up to date with the work that you are doing? And let the people know about where they can listen to your new podcast, Bite Back.
Yeah, so Bite Back with Abbey Sharp. It's my new podcast. You can find it Spotify, Apple, Frequency, wherever you get your podcasts. On TikTok, YouTube, blog, Instagram, all the other things. I'm Abbey's Kitchen, ABBEYS Kitchen. And there's tons of nonstop, nutrition debunking, and dismantling different myths and things like that. Like I said, there's a never-ending stream of stuff to talk about. And I also have a supplement line, an evidence-based nutrition supplement line called New Theory. So very proud of that as well.
The links to all of that will be in the show notes, folks. Abbey, again, thank you so much. This has been such a treat, and I really look forward to coming on your podcast and having a conversation about whatever the hell we'll end up talking about. Who knows?
I love it.